Yeah, I think it's really a challenge near to the end of the second day today, and Olaf said it already. So how much space is left in your brain? I think there was a lot of information already, and the challenge is I got a real hardcore topic here as well. So we talk about metadata, and we talk about schema management around metadata. But hopefully over the next kind of 40 minutes that I have, you will get a little more insight, I think, which is an important topic. Often a little bit neglected. Metadata is just, yeah, we need to do it sometimes in the future, but you should factor it right from the beginning. So what I will do is I will not talk a lot about XMP in general. Again, if you have questions, then feel free to approach me right afterwards. In between, what I will do today is I'll talk about schema management in particular. So the infrastructure around your metadata, and for most of you it will be an interesting talk because with PDFA in particular, extension schema is part of your thinking of your tools today. So I will cover that, but also highlight some of our current thoughts and activities from within Adobe, but also within the standardization context. So let me just go quickly through the agenda. So I'll give a quick introduction what I will talk today, give you a little bit of history on what schema management meant to Adobe at the beginning, talk about PDFA schema, while giving you the historical kind of evolution on how metadata in the ISO organization currently where it is and where it's supposed to go, some ideas around that. And then the second part is introduce a new way, propose a way that is currently being under discussions called XMG, and how this again relates back to the ISO effort, and basically in the end for you guys to also consider participating and help drive the future in that context here. So schema management, what is it in general? So the main idea is to generate a schema infrastructure to describe your metadata in a machine-readable way. So what does it mean in concrete? So what you want to do is, on one hand, you have your metadata, your structured information and your information, but on the other hand, you wanted to have a means, a machine-readable means to describe that. So you wanted to have a full environment that supports not only XML, RDF, but also XMP and the specific flavors and how XMP is using RDF. The data model of XMP needs to be fully covered because this is what we mainly talk about today. There are a couple of validation layers you can think about. So XML, RDF is clearly one. Is it correct syntax being used inside of the file? But there are additional layers of validation. So is the correct type being used for a given property? Is it that the value of the property itself is constructed? Is it in the right range or something like that? Or for example, if you have an area of information, how many elements could there be or must there be? Is it just one or three or at least one element? All those kind of questions that you wanted to have as information over your metadata to build tools around that. I just want to be clear, validation is just one aspect. At first, it really resonates that you really have a machine-readable way to describe your information so that you know more about it instead of by just looking at the values. Two other aspects here, modularity. So the overall idea is that once something has been defined in that context, let's say a simple type or even an extended type, it can be reused. So whenever a company is going ahead building their own descriptive information, then you wanted to leverage existing work by just, let's say, including it or building on top of it. And last but not least, extensibility is important as a requirement because a schema should have the flexibility to add your own information, which must not break the system. I will get into some more details later on, but one example here is just informational stuff you wanted to get into your own schema descriptions, or even hints for UI generation, or things like that you wanted to place into this environment. Throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions. If things are not clear about, or you wanted to add some of your perspective basically on work you did. So, Adobe XMP and Schema as a history. So back in 2000, then XMP had been introduced by Adobe as a platform. At that time, Schema wasn't really a big topic. There wasn't really a demand. And from solution-wise, there wasn't a lot of offering in the market. So if we look at W3C XML Schema, at that point it's not capable of describing RDF in a way that's sufficient. RDF Schema itself wasn't really that popular to be used, had a lot of tools. And last not least, XMG, which I will talk about later, at that point in time, just about had been introduced, but not really well known, and nobody really knew where it go. It was just nearly at the same time XMP had been introduced. So technology-wise, it was a little bit unclear where schema management was supposed to go. Then things evolved, and XMP became more broadly adopted standard, in particular also in the PDF context, as you're all aware of, but also in different industries. So PDF Extension Schema came along. So in PDF Extension Schema, it is basically a schema language that describes your metadata. Most of you use it as part of particular PDF or PDFA workflows. The schema information is been embedded inside of the XMP packet. So you get the information, the metadata, combined with the schema information in one block. It gets embedded into the file, everything is together and stick around. A quick structural overview of the extension schema. You start with a container, which can consist of different schemas you describe. A schema in itself that consists of multiple properties. Then you have properties themselves, value types, so types of properties, simple types, but also extended types. And last not least, fields. And the difference between field or property is a field as part of a structure, like an address or something like that, where you have name and pre-name, first name, last name, and those kinds. To date, there are some features not available in extension schema. So there are some RDF constructs like qualifiers or further validation capabilities, regular expressions, all those kind of things are not covered. This might be intentionally, but for the broader XMP schema requirements, this is a requirement that definitely needs to be part of the effort for other work. Any questions or comments so far? Still awake, everyone? On the standardization front, I want to give you a quick update on where we are with that. So, as I said in the 7-minute presentation, XMP has been published as an ISO standard. So the 3 parts, you can ignore the second and third here, but the first part has become an ISO standard as of February this year. It's available on ISO, can be downloaded, and
Finally.
Yeah. Finally.
Oh, I thought it was fast. When did it start? When you were in St. Gallen 2 years ago?
So it's been published in 2012. We started in 2010, actually.
But it should have been published in 2011.
Yeah.
The ISO a whole lot longer to publish it than it should have.
That we know of.
Yeah,
Always the case.
Yeah, I think the definition of fast, also from my perspective, got a little bit.
I was just thought.
That's a story fast. So again, TC130, Working Group 2, Task Force 4 has worked on the part 1, and the part 1 is the generic part of XMP. So it's domain neutral, whether it's print or imaging or whatsoever. It's just, you can apply this to every domain you're in. And this is also the reason why other groups at ISO have already started looking into that. So TC42, Working Group 18 is photography. And as your XMP is pretty strong in photography and imaging, they are currently looking into taking some of the existing work in 2 and 3 and basically fold this into a work item, actually a new effort inside of this group. And I expect other related groups, especially TC171, for example, to say, oh, now there is an ISO standard, why should we link to the XMP specification from Adobe back in 2005 or whatever? So I expect this ISO standard to fold into other ISO efforts and groups, because this is exactly the idea. However, in TC130, there are 2 items that are being proposed composed, built onto the generic infrastructure. The first one is, and this is what I will talk about today, is validation using RelaxMG. It's the whole topic about schema, machine-readable schema languages. This is currently been named as the part 2 of the XMP standard. And part 3, just for your interest, deals with the question of can we unify the user interface? Can we have a consistent set of labels if the user looks at a piece of metadata that it is labeled the same and the description is the same? Because we see a lot of ambiguity around the input of metadata because the user interface isn't clear and gives the user enough guidance to enter metadata. Okay, so just 2 things to keep in mind here. Also for you guys to watch out and participate or even join ISO efforts amongst different groups. I want to give you a quick introduction to RelaxMG, first by starting off where does this word come from. It actually came from regular language for XML next generation. Take 5 minutes to figure out, who basically came up with this kind of sentence. First 2 letters and okay. This is where it has been originated from. I think once you remember this sentence, you will never forget it. RelaxMG. It is a schema language for XML. It has been introduced in 2003 basically as an ISO standard. Not introduced earlier, but adopted as an ISO standard in 2003. I would say it's easy to learn, and I will get into some samples later on where you can see that. And there are open source tools available. There is an infrastructure and industry adoption, and most notably I would call it EPUB here, which is using also RelaxMG as schema definition. What is RelaxMG all about? So let's have a look at a very, very simple kind of Wednesday afternoon example here. So, and this is not, unrelated to XMP whatsoever. It's just a very simple kind of XML metadata part. So imagine you have a book, 2 pages, and you wanted to have a title for each page, just very simply represented here. How would you describe this information in a machine-readable fashion using RelaxMG? So you have the first option, which is the traditional XML representation. So RelaxMG itself is XML, describing XML, and actually describing XML serialization. So you see that there is an element named book in a good namespace. You have 1 or more elements of text, and each element is just named a page. There is a compact form alongside with it, which makes it the same information available as a 1-sentence description. So you have the same notion of elements. You have your names in here, type, and an indicator that you can repeat a property more than 1 time. There are different ways, and I think this is some of the reason why this is simple. So for simple things are simple, but you can expand and build more complex pieces and solutions into RelaxMG. So usually what you do if things are getting more complete, you use references. So the same example here, it just says there is 1 or more of those references, which then describes a page entry, and a page entry comes. So this way you can have structs, you can have a reuse of components. That's what I said earlier. The modularity is critical because once you define an XMP property, like dimension or whatever, you wanted to reuse that in all the contexts. So you put a reference in there and said, hey, just reuse that in my schema, and you're done. So everything that has been defined once, whether it's from a standards organization or within your company, you can use via includes. And that's pretty flexible. Same example we saw on the slide before in the compact form. Same information, but compact. Any questions? Is it a problem if I end early? No.
Give some coffee, so.
Good. Then remember the 7 minutes kind of part. There's more than one way to screw things up. Our RDF defines a lot of possibilities to serialize information. I just want to highlight that here because this is a problem if you think about schema validation, especially if the schema describes a serialized form. In RDF, and you can read this in chapter 7.9 of the ISO specification or the Adobe specification, if you will, is there are different forms of RDF. So you can, for example, have attributes. It's a piece of XMP here. Attributes in part of the RDF description tag. You can have attributes been spelled out as separate elements and properties nested here. You can have a description element plus including, the kind of, call it the canonical form of just having elements with values in there. And then you can have the attributed way of doing things just in this way here. So the problem is you have 3 different representations that are all legitimate XMP. In other words, legitimate RDF. So what do you validate? What do you describe actually with your schema? One part of the proposal is to use the canonical representation as the basis. Otherwise, you have to construct schemas for all the different serializations, which you don't want. But it's pretty easy to convert one existing or any existing input into a canonical form. And this is actually the one that the XMP specification had been recommending. But based on RDF, we always said there are alternative forms that are being used even in our products, and maybe in your products, just to keep that. So one of the preconditions for that is to use the canonical form, or at least to convert existing XMP into a canonical form that it can be more easily described, or more seamlessly described. Now, the ISO effort that I was describing earlier, 16684-2, is looking at 2 main areas. So one of which is the goal is to describe rules on how to construct such a schema. The idea is that every developer gets just a clear description. So if I construct a schema, it has to be this way. It has to look this way, follow this syntax, and so on. By the way, the schema definition, there is no goal here to define your schema. Right? It's up to you to build your own custom metadata, your own custom schema, and use them together. This gives you the rule on how to do that. However, the idea, and the second idea here, is to basically build a schema representations for existing XMP schemas, actually those that have been standardized in the first part of 16684. So there is a set of core properties like title, description, media management, properties, rights management, and these should be covered as informative material. Right? So it's should be available to everyone. I combine the existing ISO standard with the schema, so you have the package of having a machine-readable tool in hand you can use throughout the work. And the plan is to be open to derivation, which means whatever the first set of schemas will introduce, like types or existing schemas, you can extend that or you can build on top of that. You should reuse existing types in XMP. You should reuse existing structs in your context because they're already defined. This helps in what we do. Okay, and lastly, just as a summary on where we are with 16684-2 and ISO, the goal is to propose this as a new work item at the meeting in April in the new year. And Adobe has made a proposal based on RelXMG on how this could look like. It's available to TC130 members, so if you want to get a hold onto that, then this is the way. And finally, it's up to you to drive and define the future. So this is not written in stone here. It's just a proposal. The reason for Adobe to work with ISO, not on the XMP side, but also on the schema side, is to have you experts basically look into it and see what does it mean to PDF, what does it mean to PDFA, how does it help, how does it conflict, have the discussion, and then find the right solution alongside it. That's basically it.
Good.
And at least I wanted to get at least one question, so otherwise I feel unhappy. Good.
This relax NG thing, is it only for XMP or is it for XML in general?
It's for XML in general. We
Who
use
has
it for
created that?
Sorry?
Who has created that?
So I think the guy was called Makoto whatever, so there was
But
a person.
inside the ISO? Or?
It's inside the, yeah, it's an ISO standard
Okay.
now.
Originally W3C, I think.
Maybe, but you know, for me it's important, it's just an ISO standard. It fits to the existing strategy we have. Oasis, right there.
Do I understand it correctly? If I have an extension schema in PDFA XMP, I need to write extra relax and G to describe that?
So relax NG is an alternative way on describing the schema, in describing the XMP, similar to what extension schema does. Relax NG offers more. But yes, it's the way I think for PDF or PDFA group to participate in the discussion and see how it relates and what could happen. But it's a different way.
Alternative to extension schemas for PDFA.
For now, you don't have to do a thing, because PDFA continues to define extension schemas. If some future version of PDFA, for some future version, we can consider switching.
Okay.
But at this point, PDFA 1, 2, and 3 are still all tied to extension schemas, because that's all that exists. And they're all done, basically.
Yeah, and it might just stay this way. So basically, what we're looking for is beyond PDF, extension schema, there is no schema available that's been used out in the industry, and this is the problem we want to solve in a very kind of machine, friendly way.
So even in the world of PDFA, it has been kind of cumbersome to deal with the description of schemas in this form of extension schemas, do validation. Some validation aspects are limited because we don't have something like a range of values or regular expressions and so on, which would have been nice maybe at that time, and that was not the right time to make that part of the extension schema mechanism. And I think it's also important to see that XMP is used far beyond the world that we are in. One of the most widely used use cases is IPTC, for example, which Frank mentioned yesterday. So IPTC, for actually coming from a newspaper context, talking about images and newspaper articles, but mostly images in that context, and they wanted to describe what the image is about, who's the photograph, and whatever. All the stuff that's important around images in a newspaper context, but by now far beyond that. IPTC is used across the landscape, I think. So this is a world that's completely separate from our world, so to speak. Nothing to do with PDF, still widely used, very important for that domain. And we expect that it's going to be important in many other areas, because there are a lot of communities in need of some metadata standard, not quite happy with what they have today. XMP not only has the data model, it has some nice options to put XMP inside files, so they just stay with the data themselves. There's a couple of things that are very important. One of the biggest problems that exist with XMP, as I see it, and as we have felt, all those who have done something with PDFA, is machine validation. So how do you know the XMP you're writing or you're finding in a file is complying with the required syntax? I think you know how painful it can be. So both as a creator of such content and then metadata, like in the case of PDF, but also for consumers or whatever, or for our company writing validation software. And it's like just painful. XMP specification so far, and XMP schema specification has been text written down like this should be like this. It's not very machine readable. And RelaxMG is going to solve that aspect of the problem. And once we have RelaxMG, because RelaxMG already exists, it's not invented by us or by Adobe or anything, it's there. There are tools that you can just grab and use. You just have your schema definition and your actual data and just crunch it through your validation thing, and then you find out what's right and what's wrong. And it will also help, I think mostly will help developers of software that creates metadata just to make sure they do it the right way.
So would it be possible to write for a current PDFA extension a relaxing schema in that fine way?
Yeah, so basically,
So readable is much more powerful than what the extension schema definitions can do in a PDFA file.
yeah. I had, and I would maybe not go into details here right now, but what I've done is I take the PDFA org tech node, which comes with an example around the email addresses, those kind of things, and we're basically those 3 files here where we put an existing PDFA extension schema, which is the first one here, into RelaxNG. And yes, absolutely, this is clearly, sorry, the wrong one. This is clearly the goal that this is completely interchangeable. RelaxNG offers more. It's arguable whether one or the other is more simple or not. In the end, it's XML. It's just more or less easy to deal with it. And then this gives you a good impression based on what's on pdfa.org on how this will look in RelaxNG. I think I'm happy to just leave it there or send it around if it's on Dropbox.